We're starting part two of the 1980s with Japanese designers, specifically Rei Kawakubo, Issey Miyake, and Yohji Yamamoto. It is very hard to overstate how incredibly important these designers were to fashion in the 1980s and beyond till today. They completely reshaped fashion as we know it. So you're looking at a Rei Kawakubo looks here, and she created Comme des Garçons in 1969, but you're seeing two looks from the 80s. On the right is this bag lady look that she did that was really panned by the critics because of its ethical overtones, sort of like why are you celebrating people who are down and out, right? But what it really is tantamount to is her rethinking traditional clothing for women and how they're going to work on the body. In the 1980s, she famously says, I only design in 3 shades of black. This is another Rei Kawakubo look from 1983 to 84. So it might, I know I've described deconstruction as taking something apart and putting it back together again, but I want you to understand that as these designers are draping or tailoring on the figure, they're actively manipulating the traditional concepts of how you're going to construct a garment. And you can see that here in this Rei Kawakubo. Well, I'm going to make a slit here and I'm going to put too much fabric at the waist where it's usually gathered in. So it's a reconceptualization of the body in clothing. So another thing she does, which is not unlike what Issey Miyake will also do, um, is that she's going to, you know, her early work is influenced by traditional Japanese workwear, and so you see some of these sort of natural textiles in her early work. But look at how this is not fitted to the body. It's really obscuring the female body. That's going to be in high contrast to what European designers are going to be doing. So this is a radical new way of rethinking clothing on the body. Here are two other looks by Rei Kawakubo in the 1980s. When I was working at the Met, I photographed the piece on the right, and I remember putting it on the mannequin and trying to figure out how I could make something that was deliberately misshapen fit on the mannequin properly. A mannequin which is very symmetrical. So you can see that Rei Kawakubo took a traditional menswear coat and is deliberately playing with the proportions and where the tucks are, where the gathers are. Out of the three designers we're looking at, I would say that Yohji Yamamoto is maybe toes the line toward more traditional dress more than Rei Kawakubo and Issey Miyake. And you're looking at two pieces here. So he's, a master draper and tailor and is manipulating the body and is described as making more gender neutral clothing. So here are two looks from Yohji Yamamoto. So I mentioned that Yohji liked historical references. So on the right is a direct reference to the bustle of the 1800s. And on the left, a very elegant, simple design that you would see today, but this is, decades old. So I remember when I first came to New York, the chicest women were wearing all black, and Rei Kawakubo was ascendant and wearing flat shoes, right? Issey Miyake is an interesting designer. He's just really far ranging. When he was first designing, he was using all these natural fibers and basing his looks off of traditional Japanese workwear. And in the center, you see some models coming down the runway in sort of with these sort of kabuki styled masks and doing kabuki style Japanese theatrical walking. If you look at the image of Issey, there's a poster above him on the left, and you see it's a bustier. A bustier is like a, like a cuirass, a really corset for the bodice, and this is actually, he formed that out of plastic. So from a very early time, he's thinking about the real sculptural possibilities of clothing. These are two more looks from Issey Miyake in the 1980s, and that's the model Iman on the right, who later married David Bowie. But you can see here that he's also deconstructing clothing and rethinking the possibility of clothing on the body for women. I'm going to end this part of the presentation with Issey Miyake and sort of in the 90s, but how he's currently operating. He's created a whole line called Pleats Please, and when you see these garments like the one on the right, it actually folds into a perfect circle, almost like an origami, a piece of paper. So this is a very popular and very successful line. He's still operating.